Hey, Cypher here. I see a lot of students asking, what's the point of getting a history degree? Not everyone can go and become a historian. The field is actually really impacted. There's a lot of people who are not able to get jobs as faculty or in museums or any other kind of public history. There's so many history majors out there that they're often having to find ways of using that degree elsewhere. So I wanted to make an episode about what the uses of a history degree are. What are the skills of a historian outside of doing history? Now first, I want to say there are a lot of different ways of using that degree towards actually doing history. You can do public history in a number of ways, for instance, working in museums, working for the government, working for corporations as a historian. A lot of corporations have history departments. Hell, even most military units have a historian. They kind of function as just records keepers, but you get to write, and writing history is what makes a historian. But I don't want to make this episode about the ways in which a history degree can be used towards history. I want to talk about how getting a bachelor's in history teaches you particular skills. If you want to work as a public historian or become faculty, you're going to need an advanced degree, like a master's or a PhD. But you'll see a lot of history majors going on to get advanced degrees in other things. For instance, a whole lot of lawyers have history degrees. In fact, last time I checked, in terms of passing the LSAT, which is the test for getting into law school in the United States, the third most popular major was history. So yeah, given how many lawyers are in Congress and that, there's probably quite a few history majors in there. So there's ways of spreading out a history degree to other things. The skills of a historian apply to a lot of other things. So probably the first and foremost skill is research and writing. In undergrad, you probably read more than any other major as a history major, and you might as well write as much too. For instance, for my intro level history class, I assign about 30 pages of writing, if not more so, because that's the bare minimum. They have to write 2 to 3 pages 5 times, and then they have to write 5 quizzes and 2 tests, a midterm and a final. All of which comes out to about 30 pages of writing, if not more. And that's intro level. Think about what that means further on for upper division in that. You're writing constantly as a history major. And as opposed to being an English major or something like that, the whole point of your writing is to make a simple and clear argument. So brevity, simplicity, and just strong arguments are something that you can learn how to make by being a history major. You also learn research techniques such as source critique. You learn what makes for proper criticism, which I have talked about in a previous episode. And of course, you're reading a whole lot. Undergrads often end up reading about a book every other week, as opposed to other majors where you might be assigned 3 books. You're assigned 5 books for upper division history majors. And that's per a class. Think about that. We probably read more than any other major. I can't say that definitively, but we certainly read a whole heck of a lot. In graduate level courses, it's pretty much expected that you are reading at least a book a week per a class. So if you end up taking 3 classes, you're reading 3 books a week. Obviously, undergrads aren't expected to read that much, but they are expected to read about half as much in upper division, which is still well more than most majors. So think about what that allows you to do. If you learn how to skim books really quickly and how to critique them really well, then you are well above most people in terms of research and writing. And this applies to a whole bunch of careers. For instance, getting back to law, you're expected to go and find precedent, to talk about case history and whatnot. Well, the best major to learn how to do case history is obviously history. Duh. But there's an even deeper thing. With all this reading and having to talk about the written word and having to be as clear as possible, well, you gain a new kind of understanding. There's certain things that historians and history majors understand better than typical laymen. The first of these is context. Context. There is no one better qualified for giving a full explanation of context than a historian. So the definition of context is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So if you understand context, you understand the greater meaning of things, and think about how that can apply to a whole bunch of different things. Understanding the meaning of something means that you can write a very informative memo. Along with context, you get to learn about connectedness, as in like how all of these disparate persons, places, events, and blah 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 all are interconnected. How they aren't necessarily individual things, that everything has some sort of connection. There's a great series that you can find here on YouTube called Connections, and James Burke is kind of the Carl Sagan of history. So I highly recommend going and seeing that, if you can, because it really shows that everything's connected. Everything has some sort of causal link that makes context even more important. And speaking of importance, you have significance. Understanding the significance of something is another key aspect of what you learn as a history major. Understanding that the end of the Western genre's popularity is interconnected with a bunch of things shows the significance of those different things to the Western genre. If you want to know more about that, I made a documentary about it. And a good way of understanding how something is significant is understanding cause and effect. Something causes another thing. The significance of those causes are their effects. You can see how all these ideas interrelate, but as a history major, you're particularly adept at understanding them. Unfortunately, there are some problems, I guess you could call them. For instance, as a history major, you also learn the true depths of humanity. Some of the most horrible things you could possibly imagine you're going to be reading about. But understanding the true depravity that humanity can go really helps you understand how far we've come. And it kind of teaches you the banality of evil and how we can avoid these things. Hopefully, a lot of history is about avoiding repeating it. And speaking of avoidance, another episode well worth checking out is avoiding the 12 annoyances of historians. Link there. As the list goes, you have one-dimensional characterization, history is boring, judging with modernity, the holy trinity of US history, newer is better, alternate or fictional history, superlatives, naturalism, popular misconceptions, believed omniscience, plagiarism, and conspiracism. All of these are problems that people are really easily susceptible to, and history majors are not. Especially with conspiracism, you'd be surprised how even believing in small bits of conspiracism can weasel their way into people's psyches and end up destroying their entire perception of reality. So all of that are things that apply elsewhere, but history majors are uniquely qualified for. Then there are things that depend on the history major's specialty. So there's multiple schools of thought in history, obviously, and for instance you have orthodoxy, revisionism, and post-revisionism. And post-revisionists are particularly adept at nuance and ambiguity. So if you want to display nuance and ambiguity, you should probably be a post-revisionist. You don't exactly decide that, it's just something that kind of comes over the length of majoring in history, but it's something you can specialize in. If you're a modernist historian, as in somebody who studies the modern period, which starts in like the 16th century, so it's actually a pretty huge swath of time. But if you're looking at things in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, then you gain a deeper understanding of current issues. And then, of course, there's cross-disciplinary work, as in, if you are specializing in something that requires you to learn a lot about sociology or economics, you can specialize in that, and then you have all these benefits of being a history major, while also having all the benefits of specializing in sociology. My specialization was philosophy in undergrad. I had a philosophy minor, so I can rattle off various philosophical theories and explain them with ease. And finally, and probably most potently of all, is writing for a particular audience. Whatever you specialize in, you learn how to write for that audience. And learning how to write for a particular audience serves basically any profession you could possibly go into. You will inevitably need to write things for an audience. So whether it be very narrowly focused on like your particular profession, or like what I do here on this channel where it's talking to you guys, to a far larger audience than most academics, that is a pretty unique skill. Most majors only teach you how to write for that major, whereas history is necessarily open to writing for various types of audiences. And that concludes the list. This obviously hasn't been exhaustive, but I hope it gives a sense of how many different skills you can gain by majoring in history. It's not just doing history. If you have anything to add, be sure to comment it down in the comments and I will favorite it. Hopefully this list shows that historian skills don't apply solely to being a historian. There's things that apply to general skills. You don't have to just be faculty or work in public history. You can go and become a lawyer or something along those lines. There's a whole raft of different things. History is a skill that everyone could benefit from.